guys.
Okay, I'm Mary.
And I'm Carla.
And I'm Courtney.
And she is not a Smiley twin.
And we're the Smiley twins.
Okay, that was good. Okay.
Yeah.
We couldn't figure out what to do with that.
No.
Anyways, welcome to another episode of Not Just Lip Service. We are super excited today because the day is finally here. The beautiful and talented Courtney Walker, our Chief Legal Officer, is here joining us from Knoxville. So we're going to record like 8 episodes right now.
No, we're not.
No, we're not. That's not true.
We're not.
But we're super excited to talk to her. Mary's going to step away, I think, because, you know,
We
don't need you.
only have 2 mics.
we only have 2 mics. But mostly because Courtney and I's job roles and responsibilities within the company overlap so much in everything that we do. But she's going to talk a lot about what she does, her role within the company. And hopefully along the way, we're going to add in some good business tips and tricks and legal tips and tricks to incorporate into your aesthetics practices. This is not legal advice. She is not going to give legal advice. There is never legal advice. Okay. So we're looking forward to today's episode. And did you have anything else to add before you
No,
leave?
I just wanted to see us 3 together.
It may not be able to. Can they hear you if you don't have a
Well,
microphone?
repeat what I'm saying.
She wanted us to be on the camera.
Together.
Together, the 3 of us.
Here we
Yes.
There
Okay.
we are.
Now she's happy.
Yeah. Okay, Courtney, take it away. Tell us who you are and all about you. We are so excited to have you.
Yeah, I'm Courtney Walker, and like Carla said, I'm the Chief Legal Officer, and I do exist. I just play behind the scenes. I think very early on when we started all of this together, I encouraged Carla and Mary to lean into the Smiley twins as much as possible because 1, it's a good marketing idea, and 2, I'm not a Smiley twin, so that means I get to not be in the spotlight as much as possible.
But to be very clear, Courtney is a co-founder and co-owner of Smiley Aesthetics. She often sometimes doesn't start with that, but she should. She's been with us from the beginning, so that's a very important part. So not to keep, sorry, I just wanted to make sure that was clear.
Yeah, we at an event recently, one of our independent injectors said, "So, do you work for Smiley?" And I'm like,
oh,
"Yes."
boy.
Yes,
Yeah.
I do. I do, technically.
That is true. That is true.
Yeah, so my job is to essentially be the bearer of bad news, a bearer of good news, try to logistically in the legal world figure things out as we move and shake the industry. And I think one of the most interesting things about, even if you look at the past year, we know that our journey over the past year was not a straight line. Mm-hmm. So with every new idea that came clinically or from Mary or from all of us, it was, me looking at the law, trying to figure out if we were able to do that,
Right.
and then you looking at the operation side,
Right.
and then sometimes going back to the clinical side, and it's just this very circular idea of start with Botox, okay, let's do legal, let's do operations, let's go back to the drawing board,
Right.
and it's very much a machine with the 3 of us.
It was right away. It was basically when we started doing the Botox, which we did, and like a lot of people, and this is just true, I definitely have a businessy mind, was like, oh wow, I can see where this is profitable, this is a good market, there's good profit margins, it's all those things, but then I quickly realized, I don't think we're allowed to do this the way we're doing it. I think this is not right. I think compliantly there are question marks. And then what's medicine, what's not, what's cosmetic, what's all these things. So we quickly sought out somebody, we thought about going with just an attorney and maybe a healthcare law or just whatever, didn't even just an attorney. And then quickly realized the value in having and finding a partner, a friend, and somebody that wanted another powerhouse woman that wanted to join us in owning and operating this business, and then the value that she would bring being more than just an attorney, because we all know it's just difficult, right?
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's one of the conversations that we have so often is like that attorney role bleeds into so much, and it's not just drafting contracts or, the last time I was here in Nashville, we had a big organizational structure conversation between the 2 of us that ended with this like scribbled out piece of paper mastermind. It was like a drawing that made total sense to both of us. And it's, taking, just like, your clinical experience and your business experience, taking those two things and working them together to make the business run
Right.
as effectively as possible. The law just bleeds into so much.
Well, it defines it. I think it's just funny how we don't realize that, or we just don't give it enough appreciation and value of how it more than bleeds in, it defines it. I mean, law defines what you can do in
Sure,
business, just
yeah.
like it defines what you can do in medicine. And so the Board of Nursing, the Board of Medicine, all of those are they're not legal entities, or I guess you could almost say they're legal entities. I don't even know. Can you?
Yeah, so they're administrative entities, yeah.
Right. Who follow then the legal law that is written by the state or the government or whatever the case is. So I always give the example to the community that, like, the Joint Commission, by example, is not a legal entity. It's not a governing body. It is governed by Medicare and Medicaid, by CMS, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. That is a federal government legal entity. So it's just the person implementing the processes and making sure people are doing things right. And I think the boards are kind of a similar structure.
It's so crazy. That's one of the, I'm sure that you all have talked a lot on the podcast about our Patreon account. That's one of the videos that I have set up, is explaining this is not a, Schoolhouse Rock or something, like how a bill becomes a law.
Right.
It's not that, but it is starting off kind of at the basic level, because one of the things I think is so difficult about the law and why you have to go to law school for so long is really understanding how to read a statute and to read and know how all these things play into each other. When I first started law school, I was convinced that I had like 12 undiagnosed learning disabilities, because it's just words on paper, but when you put them all together, it's so complicated. So on the Patreon account, the new video is breaking down in a visual way, because I am very much a visual learner, how the courts and how the legislative body plays in together. And so things like the board are authorized by statute by the legislature to promulgate rules for how we operate, how the practice of law operates, how the practice of medicine operates, and then courts interpret those rules. And so just like breaking that all down, because as like, if anyone has a question on the Patreon account, it's like, have you watched that video? Because it's important to know when we talk about an administrative rule that you understand in the tree, like you just said, like the Joint Commission is authorized by this, you understand in the tree where we're at as far as authority. But
then you remind me, you say something like somebody that they can promulgate, and then she'll use some kind of legal jargon. And then it'll remind me again, it's like being constantly reminded of the value of having that person that's the expert in their field present and a part of the company. And so, not to change it to, or have a business side of it, but we talk about, co-founder, co-owner, and she does in fact own part of this company. And so for those of you out there who are looking at starting their practices and starting their businesses, I think it's important. We talk about equity. Now, that's not what this is about, or talking about ownership. But we did make that decision to not only because we saw the value in Courtney, but her having the skin in the game and the value and wanting to see the growth of this company is one of those times early on. You don't want a fish dead in the water. You want somebody who's going to continue to, bring value, which that's never been a conversation here. So you got to be careful with that. However, if I tell somebody the time that I would give up equity in my early business, for all of you out there starting your LLCs, this was that time. This is the time where if I had to pick number one in aesthetics, especially
absolutely,
with the growing industry, I would say that finding the right partner and getting another person who has experience and expertise in something that you don't know about, like the law, is certainly a good example of that. So I just wanted to put that plug in there. But then you mentioned something else. You said that you thought you had multiple learning disorders during school. And I think nurses and a lot of people can relate to that. Business as well. Like people talk about, gross profit, gross revenue, and things like that. And like a nurse will look at you like, what in the world are you talking about? But you have mentioned before that talk a little bit about every word in the law has a meaning, and it makes, everything from a preposition to a plural word has a meaning. You've talked some about that with us. So can you just talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, and I think a really great example of that and kind of how we've taken the stance that we've taken at Smiley Aesthetics and who we allow to be a part of our company is Tennessee's law on who can perform cosmetic microneedling treatments.
Yeah, great example.
So there was a law passed, I think it was in 2020, it's fairly recent, that allows estheticians to perform cosmetic microneedling under the supervision of a medical director. So that's awesome, that's great. And as I mentioned before, all of these things work together, like courts then interpret statutes.
Right.
So you look at the statute, and you look at the definition section, so there's so many words. Supervision of a medical director, esthetician, cosmetic microneedling. What do each one of those things mean? So obviously we know what a medical director means. We know what esthetician means. Supervision, does that mean direct? They have to be in there, or can that be a supervision like what we typically see in an advanced practice nurse situation? So that needs to be defined in statute. And the word cosmetic needs to be defined in statute. And the word cosmetic is not defined anywhere in the entire code section. So that would be a situation where the court would then, if someone ever sued on it, the court would step in and say, what is it's called the black law dictionary term of cosmetic. They would look at things like FDA, and the FDA does have guidance on what is cosmetic, and it's not what we do in a medical spa.
Right.
And so you have to then look at that law and say, they wrote cosmetic, and you have to look in the law, you have to read every single word and understand that every word has meaning.
Right.
So if they meant cosmetic to include medical, they wouldn't have said cosmetic. They
Right.
would have just said microneedling. But sometimes like laws are written by imperfect people
Sure.
who don't close up all the loops, and that's where the courts step in.
Yeah.
But because that's not defined, some businesses take the risk and they allow their estheticians to perform what the FDA would consider medical microneedling
Right.
under the supervision of a medical director. But we've taken the stance that a medical procedure has to be performed by a medical professional.
Right.
So we don't allow estheticians to do it.
Right. That's a perfect example of I'm literally listening to you and I'm like, who wants to go crosswalk, just the law and figure out who has the guidance. I mean, it's everywhere. I mean, it really just isn't our expertise and isn't something that we're used to doing because medicine in general is pretty cut and dry. There's gray areas in medicine, for sure, but in general, like we know that this medicine treats heartburn. Like we have pretty straight orders or guidelines into what we should do and what we shouldn't do, based on what we know. That's when what we know is gray, of course it becomes gray at that point. But we're just not used to. We want what we read. Okay, we'll take it for what it says, and that's just not the case in the law. It's just
No,
crazy.
especially in the medical aesthetic world,
Yeah,
because
wild.
it's not this industry that's 200 years old. It's not like the world of real estate where there's gray areas in the world of real estate, especially as you introduce things like text messaging, what's considered a contract, what's
Right.
considered a signature.
Right.
As the world evolves, there becomes new areas,
Yeah.
but real estate's been around for a long
Right,
time,
right.
but medical aesthetics has not. And so they're like the majority of the world is gray.
Yeah.
And it requires those, reading, like what I just said, like a statute and the board and FDA
Right, right.
guidelines, and it's just
Yeah.
piecing it all together.
It's interesting you say that about the world not catching up. I think we see that often with medical and cosmetic law. A lot of medical laws or the Board of Medicine even overseeing, the aesthetics, even the medical aesthetic sides, even Botox and fillers. Having the Board of Medicine oversee that is a little bit like, what? But we just haven't caught up. It's just antiquated.
Yeah, like you need a Board of Medicine light or something.
Or Board of Aesthetic Medicine or something along those lines, or some governing body that would help bridge the gap between estheticians and cosmetic work and then medical work, the prescription drugs, but still within that aesthetic world. Because a lot of those laws just, don't make sense. Like, we talked about how often a medical director needs to step foot in an actual brick and mortar med spa, and it's like, what does this have to do with the price of beans in China? This is so silly. It's just antiquated. Like,
Yeah,
it's just,
but
it's just
until it
old.
changes, it's the law. And
Absolutely.
one of the first things that I tell anyone who is with us is I don't care what music you play, I don't care what essential oils you diffuse.
Right.
It's still the practice of medicine,
Yeah.
and there are still certain things that you have to do and you can't do.
Right.
We can, if we really want to change it, that's when you call up people or you
Yeah.
run for office. Like, that's the way to change it.
What about protected health information? I mean, this is probably a topic we could do an entire podcast on, or Patreon video or something on.
Sure.
In the medical world, we obviously nurses and everybody are very aware and very hyper aware of protected health information. But how does that flow over into cosmetics? I mean, should we be treating it the exact same, which I think is what we all want to do, it almost feels like what we need to do, but again, the law hasn't caught up to cover those services, so it's not advice, but just kind of talk about the difference between those two and what the law says right now.
So it's a little bit of a circular explanation of what I'm going to say. Ultimately, your best bet is to follow HIPAA guidelines, which
Sure.
every medical professional is aware of,
Sure.
at least even if they don't know them themselves, they're aware of. So HIPAA is tied to federal law,
Right.
so it comes down to federal money. As we all know, the world of medical aesthetics is self-pay. We don't receive any federal money.
Right.
So HIPAA itself doesn't apply, but every state has a HIPAA cousin, just
Right.
like, and that's,
HIPAA cousin.
I mean,
good.
they have their state
Sure.
patient privacy laws, and most often in that situation where another really good example, not related to this, is discrimination laws.
Sure, sure.
Title VII is the federal statute, but Tennessee has its own discrimination laws, and they are identical,
Right.
pretty close.
Right.
So HIPAA is the federal law. Tennessee has its HIPAA cousin law, and in a situation where a court in Tennessee, if Tennessee's privacy law, patient privacy law, does not address it, then they're going to look to HIPAA.
Right.
So because it's just
Right.
it's had more litigation. They'll
Yeah.
look to it for what in the legal world we call just as guidance
Right.
and
Right.
direct authority or supporting
Sure.
authority. So all that to say, you follow HIPAA, you're doing great. But even though HIPAA doesn't apply, patients still, number one, have an expectation of privacy because it is a practice of medicine. And then there's a state law that
Right.
governs their
You bring
information.
up another good point that I don't think, and then I want to talk about legal structure, so my brain doesn't lose it. But you brought up the point of a higher level of, or a body that, if it's not necessarily defined in one place, then you'll look to another body that has either, mentioned litigation. Well, in medicine, that translates to like a board, like the American Association of Nurse Anesthetists. If they put out guidance on a certain way that an anesthesia provider or a CRNA should practice, they will have the guidance, and it'll just be literally listed as guidance. But we will often use that in medicine and regulatory and compliance, because if it's not defined perfectly in a policy, like at a hospital or something to that effect, then you are then guided by
Yes.
another body. So I feel like that's a kind of an analogy, a similar situation. It's
Yeah.
not always perfectly written down. It's clear as day. If there's a question, then you go look at another
Yes.
a body. I mean, there's like plastic surgery, National Plastic Surgery that puts out guidance. There's dermatology. So there's other places to look if you did have questions on some grayness. If you don't have an attorney in your back pocket. Or I should say side pocket right beside us, helping you. So there's other ways and other places you can go to try to get some guidance, so that if something were to happen, you'd have some backup, some evidence, some sources, I guess. You brought up something about like the state versus, can you kind of run through, and this is a basic thing, but I do feel like from a medical provider perspective, again, unless you remember your American history structure back up in high school, how the legal structure and system works, like even down to like the county, the city, and then kind of walk that up. I mean, it might be brief, but like, what does that look like for me? Because someone asked me, is the health department going to walk in? And I was like, okay. So can you just kind of talk a little bit about that, like kind of who governs who, maybe, or how that works?
Sure, and it's really state specific.
Right.
So, and that's one of the it's not difficult, but it's just one of the layers of my job here is in some states, the Board of Pharmacy oversees a part of what we do operationally. In
Right.
other states, the Board of Pharmacy doesn't.
Right.
So it's really state specific. But what starting up at the, I could start really, really boring with the Constitution, but that's not boring to me. But at the state level, of course, you have your state governor or whatever, and the legislature, the judicial system, which is the courts and judges, and so the legislature makes the laws, and then they authorize bodies to do, like the Board of Medicine, the Board of Pharmacy, to then do things like create rules, to create guidance, and that's in the tree of legislatures, and then you have a hierarchy in the judicial system. But in that executive and legislative branch, you have the legislative branch, you have the local, city, county, taxes, their own individual rules. And so if you think about like a family unit, the big boss is on top and the little boss is on the bottom.
Right.
And so the little boss would be, your local government.
Yeah, like the county clerk or something.
Yeah, who says you have to pay a tax, a local tax to run business there. And so that rule is fine as long as it doesn't violate anything above it.
Okay. Yeah.
And so you as a business, your rules for operating start at the top and they go all the way down.
Right.
Even so much so that like our Knoxville spa is in Market Square.
Yeah.
It is governed by its own individual ordinances that apply to the historic Market Square.
Yeah.
So that is, if you take the Knoxville spa, you've got Market Square in downtown Knoxville, the city of Knoxville, the city of Knox County, Tennessee, there's a lot of layers to make sure that you have everything in place that you need to for the business.
And it's not as simple as starting, if the top governs from the top down, then just go to the top. That's unfortunately not the case. Right?
No, because the state of Tennessee doesn't speak on Market Square.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So that, and again, sometimes this is what happens when me and Courtney get to talking. I think it's so funny. This is what happens in my business hour when I start talking about what any legal stuff, it does. Even I overwhelm myself. I'm like, this has got to sound like, holy moly. I think it's all doable and you can do it all.
And a good point too is at every level, usually there's someone there that you can call or that you can go into their office and I mean, I think, you in the South, we say you get more flies with honey, go in and just be like, I am trying to do everything that I can. And they're not going to be able to answer specific questions about, who can practice medicine, who can do all of this. But they can say, I'm starting a business in Knox County.
Right.
What do I need to have in place? And often the county clerk will have a checklist of some sort or whatever. But just people don't utilize that enough. Just pick up the phone.
Right, and I cannot echo that enough. I mean, Tennessee, in and of itself, the small business resources, which I think in Tennessee is defined as until you're at 50 million or something a year in revenue, something ridiculous, or maybe that's the government's. I mean, it's a big number. They have an entire small business resource website.
Yes.
And you want to be careful that you don't, go on. There's a lot of people as soon as you start an LLC that start sending you letters about how for $200 I'll give you your copies of your articles of organization. All that's BS. I mean, you want to make sure you're always on an official site, but there is one for Tennessee because I've been on it. I mean, they even emailed me and was like, have you utilized all, blah, 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 blah. There's a webinar on this. There's something on that.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a ton of free stuff trying to help small businesses because small businesses help the Tennessee economy.
Sure.
And that then therefore helps everybody else. So I do think sometimes, especially as nurses, because we're so jaded, and medical providers, we're a little bit jaded by things like the Joint Commission and surveys, and we're just trying to take care of people. But in reality, all that stuff is there for a reason. There are laws and there are rules for a reason. But instead of thinking everybody's against you, it's quite the opposite. For the most part, it's trying to be helpful, it's trying to have resources to understand things. But it can be difficult. So what would you say to the medical providers who they do try to call the Board of Nursing or whatever the case is? That's a tough question. Or I do try to call my county clerk and they never answer, but there's literally 600,000 people trying to call the county clerk. you know, what can those people do, and they, you know, don't have an attorney they can go, like, do you have, I mean, just, do you have anything to, what would you say to them? Like, the website, like, what's a good place to go, or how could they, you know, I mean, I'm talking about people who are kind of on their own. I mean, it is a beautiful thing about Smiley is we have you, and we do provide, you know, a lot of those answers, and we have those answers. But for those who aren't part of our organization and are looking to get some resources, I mean, what would you say?
So a few different things. They all involve attorneys at some level. But I think about the Knoxville area. You know, we have Legal Aid of East Tennessee in Knoxville, and while these people would probably not qualify for legal aid services, that doesn't mean you don't qualify for any legal aid material that's put out
Right.
if potentially they have any business. Now, Tennessee's really unique in that we do have small business, the website that you just mentioned, they have stations throughout Tennessee to help, like incubators for small businesses. The next step I would say is a lot of the law schools will have a, what do they call them? It's like a whole program run by a professor where people who are wanting to be in business law, and I know that University of Tennessee has that, where you can come on certain days and ask questions, and so you have the advice of an attorney there. I can't think of the word that they call them, but it's essentially like a program, and they have one for every tract at UT. So there's different ways, I think, to get an attorney involved. Unfortunately, the internet and Google is not a great.
I was hoping you would say that. I just thought about that.
It's just not great, and it's unfortunate because, as someone who is in this profession and who is a colleague with some of these people, I read some of their blogs, and I'm like, that's just not right. And I think that's, you know, a lot of times when I have to respond to an email or something, it takes me a lot longer than it would take a layperson to do it, because when I sign my signature to the end of it, I'm saying that this is the law. I'm saying that this is, you know, legally sound, and my credibility is attached to it. And so I hate that when I see a fellow attorney who puts out misinformation about the law. So, I mean, getting an attorney involved in some way, shape, or form is always the best bet. It is expensive if you're trying to front the cost. And unfortunately, in the legal world, we don't have what you have in medicine, which is really defining a track. I mean, you graduate with a law degree, you take the bar exam. Aside from a few situations, you're licensed to practice law in every area.
That's a good point.
And that's really problematic, because if you want to be in jail for a long time, you should call me to be your criminal attorney, because I know nothing about criminal law other than the one class I took in law school. Like, I know nothing about it. But technically,
a brain surgeon who just came out of medical, and it's like, oh, but you can go operate on brains or toes or eyes. Yeah, you pick. Good luck.
I mean, that's essentially what happens with a you know, I have a doctorate degree, and I can technically practice in any area. That's not wise. And so, you know, even saying that you need the right type of attorney, your family law attorney, the person who helped, you know, your uncle with his divorce, is probably not going to be the person that you need for this area. That's very, very gray. You know, that person who helped your uncle with a divorce, he or she likely could write a really simple will. Probably. Like, that's really simple, but you know, they would not be operating or in writing, doing estate planning for a multimillionaire, because that's just not their area of expertise. And we're definitely in an area of the law where it requires a certain level of knowledge of the healthcare profession and of the business world, for sure.
And Courtney is not for sale.
And there's just not a lot of attorneys out there. I mean, like, it's
like it's a valuable special thing that you've been able to do in this world, and in this aesthetics world in particular. So you are putting, you know, because I can like hear people listening to be like, okay, so then what are we supposed to do?
So we're just like
cool.
SOL.
Literally, can't need an attorney, can't use any attorney, got to find a right attorney. There's like 4 of them out there. So now what? And I mean, I don't have a great answer for that. I do think there are things that you can discover with your own brain, on your own. So it's not hopeless. It is just taking those questions to the right person, to the right attorney, I should say.
Yeah, the right questions. That's,
yeah, the right.
and that's
yeah.
one of the things I'm trying to do on Patreon is, I can't, number one, not only am I saying this is not legal advice, but anything I say can't be taken as legal advice because I don't know the facts.
Right.
It's kind of like if you go to the doctor's
Like
office.
blanketing it out.
Yeah, if you go to the doctor's office, it's only a medical opinion when you say, I have a sore throat, and then the
Right.
doctor says, this is
This is what I
probably
think,
what's wrong
sure.
with you.
Yeah.
So at least with Patreon, I'm trying to introduce questions
Right.
that you can then ask,
Right.
so then you can take it to another attorney and you
Yeah.
can say,
Yeah.
I know the right questions because what you said earlier, it's very daunting.
Yeah.
You're like, I don't even know the
daunting.
questions to
Yeah,
ask.
we don't know what you don't know. It's scary. And I will say that with all this, we are hard stance, Mary Courtney and I, that you should involve an attorney 100% in your practice. There are things you can do. You're
Sure.
not, no one's going to come blowing down your door day one because you don't have an attorney on board or didn't do X, Y, and Z. That's not so much the point, especially in this line of work. If clinically you know what you're doing, and you need a medical director like in the state of Tennessee, and you're an RN, and you know it's not within your scope to see a patient, treat a patient, assess a patient, prescribe a patient. There are things you can learn and be in a good spot. I think and I don't want to misspeak here, but I think our kind of recommendation in that regard is you can find out a lot on your own before you need to go hire an attorney to find out everything for you.
Yeah,
so
sure.
Going back to they were asking the right questions. There are things that you can do. I mean, you are the clinical provider. You are the clinical expert. So you can answer, 90% of what your business is going to be all by yourself. It's that 10% that can either really get you in trouble down the road. Again, it's not like day one. But what happened with Mary and I is a good way to live by. And I did have a background in regulatory and compliance, but still I was like, this just can't be right. Like, how am I? It's prescription medicine that I'm injecting into someone's face. That's Botox. Am I doing this correctly? Like, starting to ask those questions. Turns out we were doing a lot of the things correctly because I think she had spoken to you a good bit. But it still made me realize there's so much we don't know, and I just cannot translate this. Even with my experience, I couldn't translate it. So I was like, we've just got to have an attorney involved.
And you had a great point too, that you knew some of those questions. So,
sure.
What is within your scope?
Right.
It's not, the different levels of a license.
Right.
Like, what's not in your
Yes.
scope. And then, so it's like, well, how can I be delegated that?
Right.
What needs, and you're like, oh, okay, there likely needs to be a contract there.
Yeah.
Like, got it. I don't know what the contract needs to be. I don't know what it needs to say. I don't know what the state requires, but I know, and if I'm an RN, in order for me to inject, someone has to give me that authority because I can't do that anywhere else. Why would I be able to do it in another medicine?
Yeah.
So I think too, a lot of times, for the most part, the law is a little bit of zoom out common sense.
Yeah.
Like, why does it operate the way that it does?
Yeah.
And so you can, use common sense in this too,
Sure.
to at least identify areas that for sure you
Right.
need some help.
Yeah. And they quickly, if you take that pause, I think the other big learning point here is take that. We do get obsessed with money. We do get obsessed with, we get excited as, the clients start coming in, and it's easy to put some things on the back burner. I do think that's something that happens. So taking that pause of being like, well, wait a second, let me look at this now. Like, I'm up and running. I see the gaps. I see the holes. Let me look at this, because nobody ever. I'm not sure there's any business that starts in medicine or otherwise that doesn't. You can't get everything perfect because you just don't know what you don't know. So if you're a nurse, you do everything you can to stay within your scope of practice, like you said. That is number one, and that will guide you in so many things.
Yes.
And then to figure out, I need these things. That's really where, now you know the question. I know that I need this. Well, how do I do this? That's the question. As opposed to being like, I'm going to start an aesthetics business legally. What do I do? Like,
Yeah.
that's where you're going to spend just thousands and thousands and tens of thousands of dollars, because an attorney's going to need to research and figure all those things out, especially one that's not well versed in that aesthetics law. And then it's not just aesthetics stuff, it's the medicine part. Because how often do we call and talk about you found the, like, I need you to interpret the law, but you have to be like, well, wait a second, tell me exactly what this means. I mean, I remember describing what an advanced practice provider was, like way back in like May of last year, like you asking, so tell me what an advanced practice provider is. And I was like, oh, you know, to us, it's so common. So I think stepping away from your medical background and looking at it from that perspective helps you then clarify some of the questions that an attorney might have. But when you just step back from your own expertise. What's that called, Mary? When you know, crocodile brain, like what's that called? When you know too much about your own prisoner's dilemma.
Yeah.
Yes, you know too much about your own field that you can't even accurately translate what you're trying to say, even to yourself, into what is needed, because you're so inundated with APRN, RN, you know, prescription medicine, and it's like, well, back up off all that. And it's just an interesting issue. And then on your end, you still, even during this podcast, are saying things that over here I'm like, people probably don't know people don't know what that means.
It's like Adrian one day said, what is it when you inject an injection into fat? It's called something.
Subcutaneous.
Yeah. She said that. She was like, oh, it's just a subcutaneous injection. I was like, race judicata.
Yeah.
I know big words too.
Yeah. Insurance doctor.
Yeah.
Cool. Anyway, so what were you talking about? Yes, I remember that. That was hilarious.
But like, you know, the rules, the laws for advanced practice registered nurses are very different from physician's assistants.
Yes. Yeah.
And it's like, but wait, what? Why are they so different? And so I know that was one that was like, okay, so tell me in practice kind of what this looks like. Why is one governed by the board of nursing? Why is one governed by the medical board?
Yeah, and that goes back to your original point about why an attorney can be so expensive in this space, because I do think, you know, and we've talked about this before, attorneys can get, or lawyers can get a bad rap sometimes in terms of like the research that needs to be done. But like, if you really back up and think about how much it took for you to get in a medical perspective to do a physical assessment of a patient, just a basic physical, which would take a nurse 5 minutes, like that, none of that would translate. Maybe cardiovascular would translate to heart for some, but I mean, for a lot of people, it's like, no, your heart, and it's like, it just doesn't translate. So it's being aware of that as you go into it, both financially and otherwise, doing what you can, and then having those questions formed in layman's terms, I think also would help, or be good advice coming from me before seeking out an attorney, or when you go to seek out one. Because again, they don't do medicine unless you specifically can find, you know, a healthcare attorney or whatever the case is. But a lot of those it's just hard to come by in this world. And then furthermore, aesthetics, like it is not the same thing to say, oh yeah, I'm going to do Botox. Well, okay, that's not the same thing as a hospital attorney talking about prescription medicine.
Yes, yeah.
It's very different. Those are two separate worlds, but we talk like it's just a known situation, and we forget about that presenter's dilemma. Sure. Yeah. Oh man, I really do. Every time I sit here and we talk, it's great to see how far it's all come. Like your role and how valuable, just the business, the operations, how we've mixed it together. It's satisfying. Sometimes it's overwhelming and exhausting, but then I just have this like satisfaction.
Yeah,
say that.
And I think we too. Thank you. I feel the same way, but I think that. You know, the three of us, kind of one of the things I said earlier, have been really okay with the zigzag and not knowing, even as, you know, someone who has a law degree, even someone who has, you know, your education and Mary's education, about going into this and not knowing all of the answers and being okay with pivoting. I mean, there are certain things, like you said, like scope of practice and like big ticket items.
Like informed consent. Like,
yes.
You need an informed consent. Sure.
There's certain things that, don't
skip those.
Don't skip those. But, you know, I think there are certain things too that's like, it's okay to kind of give yourself some grace in figuring out all the things. We just said that on we commented on a live that Mary was on recently, where it's like, you have to be okay with chasing your tail. Yeah. You can't say, I will have my website up, I will have my logo, I'll have my colors, I'll have my name on every contract in place, and it will be perfect. Like I have to have all the stuff in place before I can even advertise that I'm open. It's like you will never get started.
Ever. That is a huge principle that I am so hardcore on, and it's that whole idea of build, measure, learn, that whole cycle
Yes.
of build, measure, learn, and it's like just freaking get it out there. Now again, very clearly, especially when you're dealing with medicine, there are the basics, but we as medical providers know what those are. We know we have to have a way to chart. We know we have to, you know, do little things. But did you remember that you have to put the lot number and expiration date on every single chart, because you're not in the hospital and the pharmacy is not doing that for you? Oh, I didn't realize that for 2 months. Like, that's okay. Like, okay, it's okay.
You're
Like,
going to be okay.
yeah, you're going to be fine. There are things that are going to hurt people, and there are things that we just need to figure them out and make sure we're doing them correctly. We're never messing with scope of practice. We're never messing with the fact that we have to chart on people, that we're getting our medication appropriately and having an oversight and all those types of things. But
Or like legally, if you find out, oh my gosh, I didn't file for my county my
exactly.
county business tax
Yes, yeah.
until 6 months later.
yeah,
Okay, just go do it.
you're okay. It's okay.
Like
Everything's
at
okay.
most, you're going to have like a $25 fine or
Yeah,
something
yeah.
like nominal.
Or even like get my LLC set up. Like,
Yeah.
if it's, you know, November, like try to get, you know, if you want to tax, like, okay, but like you don't have to have all of those things so perfect. Oh, I don't have my perfect bank account, my perfect credit card. Like, especially, and we're actually kind of talking about the aesthetics industry, but it really kind of does apply. Like, get it out there, you know, get going, because it's amazing how even that first client will start to define. You're like, dang, I don't even have a way to take payment.
Yes.
You didn't even think about the fact that you don't have a point of sale system. Okay. Oh, it's Venmo. I wonder if I can do prescription services over Venmo. Like, it just starts triggering these things that on the front end, no one's getting hurt, everything's fine, but it may not be perfect legally. But maybe these are things I need to ask myself as I go down this path.
Yeah.
It's the people who never look back or who never start out and start that list. Those are the ones that get caught and get in trouble. It's not the other people.
Yeah.
Right?
So at our year mark, one of the things that I did was go back through, and you know, little tweaks happen, like our medical director agreement. I made little tweaks
Sure.
along the way, but then kind of just did a deep dive into all of our agreements to say, what have we learned
Yeah.
from this year?
Yeah.
When we bring on new partners, like we've learned things about
Yes.
partnering with people and what needs
Yes.
to be in place. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, again, build, measure, learn. Just
Yeah.
like, just get in there and do it. You're not going to be perfect.
Yeah.
And
Build it up, get it out there, measure it, find the inadequacies, find what's working, what's not, find a way to measure it. And when you're starting a business, it's not necessarily have to be super quantifiable. It might just be those questions. You're asking those questions. Those are the measurements that are coming out of it. And then you learn from it. You figure out the answers, and then you rebuild it. And then you measure it again, and you just keep doing that. I mean, we're kind of in that cycle right now with our company as a whole. We're taking people beg us for new states, and we have, you know, we consistently do that, but we have taken like a moment to say, let's make sure we're absolutely tied up in every state that we're in. There's nothing new. There's nothing that we missed. Like, we're really going through all of those our current internal processes to make sure they're appropriate. And if you're not basically doing that on a very consistent basis, then you're messing up, because when you're small, it's even easier. Like, if you would start that foundationally, we always talk about foundation from the beginning, and you set aside time to look at what you're doing from that outsider in perspective. I mean, dedicate time, I would even argue. And then you'll find when you're all of a sudden there's nothing to it, because you consistently know that foundation is strong.
Yeah.
And you just consistently strengthened it. And you just can't say it enough. An attorney is just a core component of that. The legal system is just not something we know, and you just need that assistance. And I feel like saying that I'm not talking about a company. Courtney's not for sale. I don't have an attorney I would recommend. Like, we're truly just saying that from the bottom of our heart. I mean, Courtney's our full-time chief legal officer. Like, it's just what has to happen, and
Yeah.
what has made us.
Which, and I would
so
say, you know, and I say this to some law schools that I've given like guest lectures at and
Yeah.
stuff is, and we said this on a call recently, is that we all, the three of us, fed this for a
Yeah.
while. And while, you know, it might not have been $10,000 out of the company's pocket to pay me, you know, it was all of my time free of charge, essentially, to build up what we have. All of
Yeah.
your time on the business, all of Mary's time on the clinical. You all were injecting people left and right and putting it back in the business. Like, it was very much a sacrifice. So I tell people on the legal side that if you do have an entrepreneurial spirit, be eager to build something with someone, because I would never be able to do any of this, like, as an attorney. I don't know, and like I don't know so much of that, which we all have a good appreciation for the role that we each serve, and we all tell everyone, like, we couldn't, this is because of all three of us. But you know, as an attorney, I think I would tell another attorney, like, be eager to help someone if you feel a connection with them and they need help building it. Like, be eager to sacrifice some stuff to help them, and don't worry so much about the billable hour. It can pay back, you know, 100-fold if you can do some sacrifice. And I would tell any medical professionals, if you know someone who's an attorney, they might not be a med spa attorney.
Well, they're probably not going to be.
They're probably not. Like we talked about, like, there's just not a lot out there. But if you feel like they are, you know, a go-getter, and that they will put the time and resources into learning, learning and pivoting, that bringing them on as a partner might be a great move for you.
Yeah, I can't agree more. I think what I hear her saying is it was the best decision she ever made.
Yeah. It's so funny. I like vividly remember we were at, or I was at Mary's house when she lived in Knoxville, and we had all of our wild kids there, and there was like a bunch of friends there, and she talked to me about helping get some things set up, and it's like, absolutely. I was a business attorney, so it's like, sure. And then I did some research, and I was like, did you all know that, like, not only is no one doing this, but no one's doing it correctly, and we could be, like, the ones. And I, like, it actually, like, gives me goosebumps and, like, makes me a little emotional. We was in her bedroom, and she was like, I feel like this could change our lives, Courtney. And I was like, it's like,
I'm gonna get emotional too.
I mean, it is kind of crazy to say that, like, that's not that long ago. And in so many ways, I mean, it's changed my family's life.
Yes, very much. And I think it's partnering with the right people. I think that's, you know, you make that choice, you make that decision. It wasn't lighthearted. There were many conversations. I didn't know Courtney, for the record, really at all. I'd only met her briefly through Mary, and of course our friendships. And I remember I was in Asheville when, like, the next weekend or something, or that weekend, when Mary was like, so talk to Courtney, and I was like, what? But we had already brought up that we knew we needed the legal side of things. So, it's a pivotal moment, because I can remember walking around my hotel room, talking to different people, my aunt, my mom's sister, talking to her about what that would mean, and giving up equity, and how we were going to do that, and all those things. And it's a pivotal moment in anybody's business, but it really can just be life-changing. I mean, it is wild. Like, it's crazy. We need to do a whole podcast where we just sit back and talk.
Well, and I think we have such an interesting perspective, because, you know, you can talk about being in business with your best friend and sister. I can talk about being in business with my best friend and identical twins. And then, like, being in business with two people who did not know each other. At
all. We didn't know each other. I mean, I think we met like a couple times. Like
I think maybe one. I think baby shower, and then one really in-depth when you were over at the house. And we talked about, at that time, we were talking about diversity. We spent like 3 hours on an in-depth conversation about diversity.
That is right. You're exactly right.
When you were at HCA. So, you know, then and those things come with, like, again, like the build, measure, learn. Like, we've all. It's been a great journey.
Yeah, it really has. High five. Okay.
Mary's over there in the corner giving herself a round of applause.
Just being weird. Okay, so anything else we want to touch on? I don't even know how much time we're at, because probably longer than I think, because that's what always happens. But anything else you want to add on, or any thoughts for future, like what we're going to talk about in the future podcast, which is, I'm kind of putting her on the spot on that, but like, just anything else you want to shout at?
So I think one of the biggest things that I did, I know this is like the 4th plug for our Patreon, but as a free resource on the Patreon account, I have a list of questions that we will be talking about.
great.
And so that is, OSHA. What does your
Yeah.
med spa need for OSHA requirements? Where can you find those? Where are some
Right.
free resources? So my plan is to just kind of dig into those and to do video segments
Yes.
about it.
Yeah.
We're doing a whole segment on semaglutide, all the way down from why can we compound semaglutide at this stage to what are some of the upcoming areas of
Potential,
concern from the legal side. So I'm just going to break down these topics, and I think if if you have a recommendation
Yes.
for a topic, I would suggest that you find me,
Comment, yes, reach
find me
out.
on social media. It's Court Approved Aesthetics.
Yeah. So cute.
Find me on social media and let me know something that you really are interested in talking about, and so we can, I can do it on the Patreon. We can come back on and elaborate more on it. And I think that's the best way for us to be really specific on talking about this area generally and for
Right.
navigating the legal compliance and the attorney legal advice issue. So legal education is very clearly not legal advice, and I think a lot of attorneys really get nervous about that
Medically,
that
we
fine
should
line.
understand that too.
Yeah.
Like medical advice, like it's not medical advice because you should just go to the ER. Where we should understand that more than anybody else in the medical world, because God forbid you tell somebody something and they're like, well, it was medical advice. It's like, no, that was just, you should go to the ER. Like we just all, so similar situation.
But some upcoming questions. I mentioned the semaglutide, physician compensation, and your
that's a great
staff compensation. What are some ways that you need to be wary of fee splitting laws and Stark and anti-kickback, OSHA and general, guidance on that. Good faith exams. Who can perform one? How long are they good for?
Yeah.
How often do you need one? What are some of those requirements? So I'm just going to take all of those head on and just break it down the best that I can. And
some really meaty topics. So like she said, the Patreon is going to be more that direct educational content, and then again, reach out, comment, or not like, but comment on this video, or reach out to at Court Approved Aesthetics. And I'm at C Smiley Injector, or whatever the case is, however you want to reach out to us. Because the conversation piece, I think, is also good. There's a lot of tidbits that come out when you're just letting things kind of flow and chat that we think of that are not as, okay, we're going to talk about, an LLC. And then you do this 5-minute or 10-minute video on it. I think there's some things we can really get into on this podcast as well that will really bring some value and some personal experiences. So I'm just glad we got you here for one. She's been here for the record multiple times. She comes all the time, and then we just life and Smiley Aesthetics.
like we're going to do it. We're going to do it,
Mary
and
was
then.
like, we're doing it right now, or else we will just work.
But that's
through.
a story of our business.
I know.
We we have a long agenda for today, and Carla and I are discussing it, and Mary's like, "I need you to put on your microphones."
on.
Like still discussing the agenda as we sit down.
And
So
literally, we're trying to decide like a state level, like national problem, and Mary's like, "Get your microphone on." And I'm like, okay, we're gonna get our microphones on. But anyways, we're so glad to have her. And we're so glad to have her as a partner, a friend, a mom, a wife, all the things that she is to us and to this business. And it is the three of us every step of the way, even though, like she said, Smiley, that's me and Mary, and the Smiley twin things is too good to pass up. But Courtney's face is certainly going to be more a part of it. So get ready. And she Smiley sweatshirts it, which is great. She brings this level of, beauty and different that I just can't. I think
it would be like Mary said it too. I think it would be like really cheesy if you all. But since I am not a Smiley, then I have like more liberty to plaster them on my body.
100%. She does it so well. So well. That one you did with the coffee cup was freaking hilarious.
Yeah.
So anyways, as always, I'm not as weird as Mary. Like and share, like and subscribe. We really do appreciate it. And if you, again, find value in it, that is certainly and especially Courtney and Mary's in this industry we are breaking down. It's collaboration over competition. So please share if you find value in it. It's not so that we have more people watch it. It's that we're really trying to get information out there that is right and that is correct. So if you do enjoy this at all, you took anything from it, then somebody else probably will too. And that's what's going to elevate the aesthetics industry, as Mary always likes to say. And that's what's going to bring more clients
absolutely
to the aesthetics industry and make us all better.
Yep.
So, yeah. Okay, I think that's it.
Okay.
All right, we'll talk to you next week.
Bye.
Bye.